This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 235, How to Get Started in Podcasting, an interview with Jeremy Enns of Ascetic Productions. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we hope you grow your tribe and your bottom line through insanely good content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is July 13th, 2017. Hello, or as we say in Texas, howdy, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, this podcast is available on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play Music, so if you like what you hear, please feel free to click on over and subscribe. I also invite you to download our complimentary audio, 5 Things You Must Know About Content Marketing. Download today to get the scoop on 5 things you absolutely must know to reap the benefits of a solid content marketing program. To snag your free copy, go to contentmarketinggift.com. Now, I know it's only July, but Content Marketing World will be here before we know it. And this year, guess who is serving as moderator? That's right, yours truly. I am so excited. As always, the event will be in Cleveland, Ohio, and this year's dates are September 5th through 8th. So if you are in the States, those are the 4 days after Labor Day that's going to be going on. And hotels are already starting to fill up. So if you're planning on going, make your plans now. Speaking of which, I have a promo code for you that will save you $100 off your registration. When you go to register, enter the code RESONANCE100. Now that's Resonance, all caps, 100. To learn more and to grab your spot with your discount, go to contentmarketingworld.com. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, this is an affiliate code, and I do receive a small commission on every registration with this promo code. I have to let you know that. Keep the lawyers happy. Again, the code is Resonance, all caps, 100, and the website is contentmarketingworld.com. And if you are planning on being there, toss me a tweet at Rach Parker. I would love to connect with you, and maybe we can grab coffee during one of the breaks. That would be awesome. Believe it or not, we have hit the halfway point of 2017, and last week we looked at the top developments in content marketing that will shape our strategies for the rest of this year and beyond. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to check it out on iTunes or visit the RSS feed. Today, we are delighted to welcome Jeremy Enns of Ascetic Productions, who will share his insights on how to get started in podcasting. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. The latest volley in the ongoing arms race between Instagram and Snapchat was launched this week. This is actually a big update on Snapchat. All users can now add links to their snaps. This is previously a feature that was only available in advertisements and also in Discover content, but this is now open to everyone. You can add a link to your snap. What you do is when you create a snap, you'll now notice a paperclip icon alongside the other tools. Just tap on it and enter your URL. And when users see your snap, they can swipe up to get to the link that you have specified. Now remember, you need to tell users to swipe up because not everybody knows how that works. So when you do a snap, use the paperclip icon to add your URL, and remember to tell viewers to swipe up. Snapchat has told TechCrunch that all links must abide by its terms of service, community guidelines, and privacy policy. So no spamming, no phishing, no funny stuff. I don't need to tell you guys that, right? I mean, you are always on the up and up. So that's the latest from Snapchat. So, okay, Instagram, your move. Let's see what they come up with. Facebook is testing an interesting addition to Pages. They're testing the addition of page descriptions as a text overlay on top of cover images. Facebook has shared some details about how this will work. If the page admin has filled out the page's description in the About section, the text will automatically be transferred to an overlay on the cover image, and it can be edited via the Edit Information option on the cover image. Now, again, this is a very limited test right now, but if you want to see what it looks like, go to facebook.com/Acodie. That's ACODIE. And this is a brand that was one of the test subjects. So just being tested right now, and if it goes well, we presume it will be rolled out to all at some point. So all the more reason, make sure your page description is filled out and make sure that it makes a positive impression of your brand. Just don't just tell people we are a provider of blah, blah, blah. No, tell people what's special about you. Make people share something that gets people excited about who you are and what you do. So we all want to be ready when this feature rolls out. Now, I don't know if it's going to roll out automatically or if it's going to be an option. So let's wait and see how that transpires. Okay, our content hit of the week is called 3 B2B Case Studies That Prove the Power of CTAs by Sean Martin on the Moz blog. We love Moz, don't we? So we all know that we need calls to action, otherwise known as CTAs, on every piece of content and on every landing page. We always need to be giving people that next logical step. But when's the last time you really thought about how those calls to action are presented? The wording you use, the positioning of the button, how you invite people to take that next step. Well, in this post, Sean shares the results of a psychoanalysis study that revealed some of the best practices for getting engagement with CTAs, with calls to action. And then he goes on to present 3 B2B case studies that show those best practices in action. It's really an excellent read, and it's a topic that not a lot of people are talking about. Great information. And I will, of course, share the link in the blog post for this episode at resonancecontent.com/podcast. That is it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please tweet it to me at @RachelParker so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, How to Get Started in Podcasting, an interview with Jeremy Enns of Ascetic Productions. Jeremy Enns is the storyteller-in-chief of Ascetic Productions, a podcast consulting, production, and education company. For as long as he can remember, Jeremy has been drawn towards helping others hone and share their unique stories, allowing them to forge authentic connections with their audiences through those stories. He is an absolute podcast fiend, once spending a full year of his life listening to an average of over 50 hours of podcasts per week. Oh my gosh, I thought I was a podcast geek. Jeremy, you got me beat. Jeremy's love of podcasts is only challenged by his love of ice cream and Star Wars, paired together if possible. And today he is kind enough to join us to chat about how to get started in podcasting. So without further ado, here's my interview with Jeremy Enns of Ascetic Productions. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Rachel, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. Hey, so I just gave everyone your official bio, but can you give us a little bit of a more personal introduction to who you are and what you do?
Okay, so as you mentioned, my name is Jeremy Enns, and I am currently living in Vancouver, Canada. I've spent the past about 6 or 7 months traveling in Europe, working remotely, but I'm really glad to be back home now. And besides podcasting, that's kind of one of my big obsessions in life. I am also a just obsessed person when it comes to ice cream. Ooh. I'm actually starting an ice cream podcast with a few friends, just a kind of fun project that's coming out later this week, I believe. And I also am a huge Star Wars nut.
Okay, so I have to ask you about the story. Is it all Star Wars? Is it 4, 5, and 6? Is it 1, 2, and 3? Where's your preference?
Well, I find that a bit tough to answer because obviously I do love the originals, and I was still quite young when the prequels came out, and so I did like them at the time because it was new Star Wars. How could you not like new Star Wars as like, I don't know how old I would have been, a 13-year-old or something like that. Uh-huh. And now the new ones are coming out. I really love these new ones. I really like what they're doing with them. I don't know that anything will ever touch the originals, but I think there's a lot of nostalgia in that. But I've consumed so many of the books and the expanded universe and all this and video games and really everything there was Star Wars that you could get your hands on. I have been there.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, may the force be with you. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your story, Jeremy, and how you came to fall in love with podcasting.
So a few years ago, actually, let's go back a little bit further than that. A few more years ago, I went to audio school and wanted to record bands and work in the music industry as a producer and sound engineer. And so I went to school for that, and I interned at a couple different studios around Vancouver here. And at one point, I realized after a couple of years of that I just did not love that enough. It did not give me enough fulfillment to be doing the, showing up at 8 a.m. and then working until 3 or 4 a.m. as an intern and, not making much money, if any, off any of the recording there. And, it was a lot of fun. I made a few albums that just as an experience were so rewarding, and they're just things that I'm going to always be proud of, creating amazing music with other people. But it just wasn't a career option for me at that point. I was still working. I was actually working a full-time job plus doing that. And so I just stepped away from that, and I did a bit of traveling and came back and just worked some odd jobs. I did tree planting in the summer and some landscaping and stuff like that. And so a couple of years ago, it ended up that I was doing landscaping, and I had started a new job, and kind of the first day I saw, other people listening to music. I guess that's acceptable here. So bring my iPod the next day and listen to music. And I thought, yeah, I don't know, music's all right. But, I remember I used to listen to audiobooks at another job. So then I went home and started looking for audiobooks. And I thought, actually, I've heard about these podcast things that people have been talking about, but I've never listened to one. I wonder what's out there. And so I go online and immediately see that there are podcasts for everything you could imagine, and just probably dozens for every topic you can imagine. And so I was really getting into, my goal at that point had been to create some kind of location independent business. And so I started looking into entrepreneurship and small business podcasts, location independence, and found just a whole ton of them around that kind of stuff in online business. And I basically from that day on became obsessed. And so I was listening to, like, all day at work, 8 hours plus, probably in the evenings a little bit, on the weekends. I was listening to just an insane amount of podcasts. And I was, since I was particularly crazy, I was listening to them on 1.5 or 2 times speed. And just, it was an insane amount of information. But really, I really credit that time, those few months there, listening to that many podcasts and consuming that much content to really getting me started. And so it wasn't long after that where I a friend of mine just made an offhand comment. I was looking into getting into photography. I'm a photographer as well, and trying to create a business around that was online based. And a friend said to me, you could do like podcast editing. And I had kind of thought about that idea before, but after working in the studio environment, it's a much more complex setup there, and you need to know so much more. And I had kind of just brushed it aside as, it's so easy, it's kind of beneath my skill set. And then when this friend of mine made this comment, I thought, wait a minute, like I could start getting clients tomorrow and have an online business like by the end of the week.
Right.
And so I did that, and it was, within a week I had the first client, and within 6 months I had quit the job and was off and running.
Great, wonderful. So how do you work with clients now? How do you support them? What are their needs when they come to you, and how do you help them succeed?
So I have a number of services that I do. So part of that is a consulting kind of aspect, where if people are unsure about how a podcast might fit into their brand, I like to work with brands and entrepreneurs, small businesses, and that kind of thing as my kind of focal group of people who I like to work with. And so a lot of times they're not quite sure how to get started with podcasting, or kind of clarifying the content and what is going to make a good podcast that works for them. Because, people, depending on how they run their business and their personality and how they want to come across to their audience, they can be quite different between the style of podcast that you want to do. So a lot of that is getting to know them and getting to know their goals for their podcast, and if they're planning to monetize it and how that is. Most of us have that as a goal when we start a podcast, but there's a lot of different routes to that. So it's really just that aspect of it is getting to know them and helping them clarify what's going to be the best option for them. I also do monthly production packages and I should say I offer monthly packages, but it's for however many episodes you publish. If that's weekly or more than one a week or every other week, whatever, we can make something work. But so that in that respect, they will record the podcast on their own, and depending on the package, you can send it to me and I'll just edit it or do the show notes and pull out quotes for, Twitter and Instagram, shareable stuff like that, graphics, really everything you need to not have to worry about any of the post-production after you finish hitting record. And then on top of that, as not really a client offering, but I've also started getting into some products. So I've just put out a gear guide ebook, and next month, sometime probably mid-August, I'm going to be releasing a course on how to get set up podcasting.
Wow, that's wonderful. It's interesting, Jeremy. I'm so happy to hear that when people come to you for consulting, that your first stop is to talk about the content, because I hear it from so many people. It's like, okay, I want to start a podcast. Okay, great. What do you want to talk about? Well, I heard podcasts can be really good for like lead generation, and yes, they can. What do you want to talk about? And they're like, I want to share my thoughts, I guess. And okay, sharing thoughts. What kind of thoughts? And they hear these people talking about podcasting, and then they haven't really formulated in their mind, okay, what am I going to share and how am I going to add value? Do you find that?
Yeah, I find that a lot. And I think that attitude is one of the biggest reasons why you see so many podcasts. You're just scrolling through iTunes and you'll see, they have probably 7 episodes is I think the most common. I call it the episode 7 slump. And you get to episode 7 or maybe even before that, and you're publishing every week, and then you see, oh, there's 2 weeks between shows, and oh, then there's a month between shows, and then it's been 3 months, and then there's no more.
Right.
And I think the biggest reason for this is people not having a clear idea of who they're speaking to and what they're speaking about when they start, and really getting clear on that before ever getting into any of the technical stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I almost want to start a rescue mission for all these poor orphan podcasts. It's like, oh, sweetie, I'll take care of you. Come on.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yes.
Yeah. So before we get into a little bit of the meat of how to get started in podcasting, I would love to hear your insights on the state of podcasting right now, because what I'm hearing is that the public's appetite for podcasts is increasing, and I know Edison Research does they do an annual review or an annual survey of online marketing, and continuously year after year we're seeing more and more people discovering podcasting, listening to them, more people listening monthly and weekly. Then again, according to Social Media Examiner's most recent report on the social media marketing industry, only 8% of brands are using podcasting. And of those who are not, 60% have no plans to get involved in it whatsoever. So it's like there's this huge gap between demand and supply. So from your perspective, what is it that's holding people back from getting into podcasting?
I think a big part of it is that they don't realize, I think they underestimate the demand for podcasting, and I think a lot of brands think that it's a bit of a fad that might go away. And it is a bit scary committing that kind of time and money to starting something that you're not really sure, it's unproven, at least for your brand. And are you going to actually, follow through with that and spend the time and spend the money and make it good? And if you're unsure of the results, you don't have any data to fall back on and say, well, this is how it's working or has worked for us in the past. And because it is so different for different brands, how they operate their podcast, it is a bit hard to draw a conclusion from what somebody else has done. And I think part of it is like what we talked about there. They're not really sure. And I guess part of this is to their credit here. They're not diving into it without being sure how to do it, but they don't really know how to make a podcast that reflects their brand and that will actually connect with listeners. So I think that is probably one of the big reasons why there aren't more brands getting involved in podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as you mentioned, it's growing in popularity, and at least in terms of advertising, brands doing advertising, more and more big
Yeah.
brands are getting on the bandwagon here. So
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see more small brands really
Yeah.
make this a part of their marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned you work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, entrepreneurs. I mean, podcasting is made for them because you're the
Yes.
face of the brand. So why not be the voice of the brand?
Yeah. And, the thing that I tell people about podcasting, it's a bit hard to justify at the start
Mm-hmm.
because, I really I tell people that you need to commit some time to it, like 6 months or a year, probably
Mm-hmm.
6 months at the minimum, before you can really expect to start
Yeah.
getting traffic.
Yeah.
And that's 6 months of putting out really high quality podcasts. So if
Mm-hmm.
the first month or two, you're feeling it out kind of and finding your groove, that's fine. And
Mm-hmm.
I really do recommend people to start
Yeah.
and improve incrementally along the way, because
Mm-hmm.
that's really the only way you're going to do it. But you have to be putting out good content for a while before you're going to start really seeing those numbers increase, and you're going to figure out the marketing aspect and the promotion along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't expect results for 6 months to a year, that's kind of a tough pill to swallow for some people.
Mm-hmm.
But the flip side of that I tell people is, I can't think of another type of advertising or marketing that builds the same level of connection as a
Yeah.
podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So like blogging is similar in many ways, but there's something unique about having your voice there, and it's an intimate medium, inviting somebody into your ears with your headphones and
Mm-hmm.
spending time, a lot of people will binge listen to podcasts every single day or multiple
Right.
episodes a day when they're catching up. And so that's really a hard connection to find in any other type of marketing for your brand. And if you can get people coming back to you regularly like that, it's not a stretch to think that they're going to, sign up for whatever you're offering at some point.
Right. Right. And if not they themselves, they can be your evangelist. So if
Yeah,
someone else has a
exactly.
need, yeah, they can send them over.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I tell people sometimes, it's like, okay, when someone listens to your podcast, you are literally getting in their heads. I mean, what
Hmm.
other form of advertising can say that, right?
Yep, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more of the meat of our discussion here. So when someone comes to you, says, "Hey, I really want to get into podcasting, Jeremy. I know nothing about it, so where do I start?"
Well, so the first place that I always get people to start is not really where they want to get started. So many people, they want to dive into the gear. They're immediately, they say, I want to start a podcast. What kind of microphone do I need? And what kind
Exactly.
of software do I need? And I tell them, okay, I can give you all that information, but that is probably the least important part of your podcast. And your gear is not really going to do anything for you. It's going to give you that professional sound.
Mm-hmm.
But if your content is good, people will listen to it if you record it on your iPhone. And I've worked with
Mm-hmm.
clients who've got, 500 listeners an episode fairly quickly after launching, recording on their MacBook or iPhone mic,
Mm-hmm.
and because they were putting out great content.
Right.
So really, the place you do want to start is on the more conceptual level, which people don't like to hear because it sounds more like work, and it is. But the first part of that is really honing in on who your audience is.
Yeah.
And you might have some idea for what you want to say, but if there isn't an audience out there who wants to hear that, your podcast isn't going to do well, even if it
Mm-hmm.
is, at least you think, great content.
Mm-hmm.
So I always get people to, reach out to people who they already know in their audience, and, do surveys if they have an email list or things like that. Or just, call people on the phone and talk with 5 different people or 10 different people or whatever, write emails out to people, but really getting to know who your audience is and what they want to know. And it's about, there's probably other podcasts similar to the one you're going to launch
Mm-hmm.
in your niche, but you need to find out if your audience are listening to those, and
Yeah.
what do they wish was covered that isn't, and
Mm-hmm.
where do you fit in to what they want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people are going to be able to teach certain aspects of your niche better than you are, and so you're not going to want to talk about that, but there's some area where you will be uniquely suited
Right.
to speaking to your audience and engaging with them there. So I think the audience is really always has to be the first step in starting a successful podcast, and really getting clear on that. And once you know your audience, that's actually going to dictate a lot of the rest of your podcast. So what kind of content you cover is going to be dictated by what your audience wants to learn about. And, you can throw in topics that they might not know that they should know about that you do, because you're the expert after all.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is, where are they struggling and where can you help them there? And so first, getting clear on the audience is really the step that's going to make everything else come together later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, Jeremy, I can almost hear the people in my audience shaking their heads right now, because I am such an evangelist for know your audience, know your audience, know your audience. And it's not just podcasting, it's all content.
Yeah.
You've got to know what people are hungry for and deliver it. It's not about you pontificating and sharing your philosophical ideas. It's you got to meet a need.
Yep, exactly. So the second thing that I would really encourage people to do after they know their audience, and this is the other kind of essential point for me when it comes to podcasting, is the podcast that each of us falls in love with and keeps coming back to. They probably have great content, but there's a lot of podcasts out there that put out great content that just aren't engaging for whatever reason. And I think sometimes it's hard to put our finger on why that is. But for me, it's all about you as the host, or you and your co-hosts if you have multiple hosts, but really being comfortable and true to who you are. And really, this is another one where I like to encourage people to get a little bit uncomfortable and talk to the people they know, their friends and family, and ask questions like, what is it about me that draws people to me? Like, what are my strengths as in my personality? And, what do you think are my best attributes? And these are kind of uncomfortable questions to ask people, but you really want to pull those out in the podcast. And if people gravitate to some part of you, whether it's your humor or enthusiasm or your wit or whatever it is, your ability to, take complex topics and present them really clearly so that people can understand, this is something you really want to push to the surface. And, it's not about not being your unique self if you're pushing up certain aspects, but it's just putting those on display and really drawing people to you through those aspects that you already know people gravitate towards.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to broaden this out to all content, because as I tell my clients, if we're all out there trying to be capital P professional, we're all going to sound the same, and there's going to be no differentiator. So figure out what makes you you, and then rock that, be professional, but still be yourself.
Yeah, and the thing that I always come back to with podcasts that I really, really love, like, there's a lot of podcasts that I listen to learn things, but there's a much smaller number that the entertainment and the knowledge and whatever else they're offering, it all just comes together. But it's hosts who are comfortable enough with themselves that they'll leave mistakes in there and their quirky little whatever it is, idiosyncrasies, and they leave that in the podcast, and their audience ends up loving them more for it. And some of those things might turn people away, but that's okay. The people who do stick around, if they are coming back because they like you, then they're never going to leave, because you're always going to be there, right?
Yeah, it's funny, Jeremy, because I've been a do-it-yourselfer since I started, and when I edited those first few podcasts, man, I was editing out every every audible breath, every pause of more than a couple of seconds. I mean, it was great. For one thing, it's way time consuming to do it that way, but it just came across as very kind of flat and over processed, and it just didn't feel natural. So I had to learn that.
Yeah, and that style of editing and production does work for some podcasts, but if it's not you, then it's just not a good fit, and which is good news for you, because it means less editing and less work after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got our content idea, we've got an idea of our style. So what's next for us to do in starting a podcast?
So once we've got kind of the concept developed and who we are as a host developed, then we can start focusing on some of the technical gear aspects. And I think a lot of people just get there's kind of two camps here. People just love gear, whatever it is, and for whatever reason, and like I get it. I love audio gear too.
Sure.
It's got like buttons and flashing lights and knobs and dials and everything. It's pretty cool. But I think when you're starting out, you can keep it so basic. And there's a couple mics that I often recommend that for $60, you can get a completely professional sounding podcast, USB microphone. You don't need anything else. And I know I have friends who have podcasts who get over 10,000 listeners every episode who are still using a $60 mic and nothing else. So it really, there aren't any excuses when it comes to gear as to, if I had this better microphone or if I had this mixer or whatever, this software, then I would be able to get more listeners. The bar is so low here. And, if you find yourself, you are getting thousands of listeners or tens of thousands of listeners or whatever, or you're starting to talk to bigger advertisers or whatever, and your show's really taking off, then feel free, upgrade your gear, especially, if that makes you feel more professional and more comfortable on your podcast, that's great. But when you're starting out, that should be the last thing on your mind. And really also, because so many people get into podcasting and do hit the wall and quit, if that ends up being you don't want to have spent, $600 on a microphone and a mixer and all this stuff and end up, gathering dust on your shelf.
Right. Well, speaking of podcasters who quit, there's probably pretty good aftermarket for for that equipment once they back out, right? Hit Craigslist.
I should look into that. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. So we've got our gear. What's next on the list?
So after the gear, you're probably going to look into actually booking some interviews if this is your style of show. I know not everybody does strictly interview shows, but that's probably, I don't know, what would you say, 80% maybe of podcasts out there are kind of solo host with an interview, something like that, probably, just off the top of my head. And so here again, this is one aspect here that is completely dictated by who your audience is and knowing who they want to hear from. And once you have been podcasting for a while, it's a bit easier. You can actually, if you have an audience built up, you can ask them if there's people they want to hear from. You can ask your past guests who they think you should talk to, which I always recommend doing if you have some kind of, pre or post interview form that you get your guests to fill out. Just ask, do you know anybody who would be a good fit for this show? Something like that. And I know a lot of podcast hosts, even of fairly large podcasts, can often struggle to find consistent guests for their shows. So the thing about getting guests on and interviewing, this is another area where I think people really undervalue the importance, is doing your research beforehand. And if you're having an expert on your show and they've done multiple interviews and you've heard them elsewhere, either written interviews or on other podcasts, a lot of kind of these experts in our world kind of do make the rounds, and that's okay. And they're great. They can be a great help for your podcast. If they have a large network and they promote your show, that can be huge for you. But nobody likes hearing the same questions and the same answers round and round and round. Probably if they're coming to your show when you're starting out, they've been on some bigger shows already that, those hosts have already asked them all the questions, and people would just probably be better served to go to check out that podcast than yours if this guest is on. So it's really about doing your research before the interview and figuring out, listening to the other interviews that they've done and figuring out, what are you still wondering about? What do you want to know about them and their expertise that hasn't been asked before? And figure out some new questions that they haven't faced and make them think about it. And I think this is something that really separates the great hosts out there from, every other podcast host who kind of has their set questions. And, at the end, they might get to one or two unique questions to that guest. I think that should be flipped. And I think you might want to have, a few questions at the end that you ask of every guest. And then your whatever 5 to 10 questions that you ask during the interview that are completely unique to that guest themselves and something that people can't find anywhere else. And if you start listening for this in a lot of big shows, you'll actually realize that is a much more common format where you can almost tell you're just listening to normal podcasts and it's kind of the interview and response format. But if you listen to super popular podcasts versus average ones, you'll realize that the type of questions are almost reversed, where the popular ones are way more uniquely focused on the guest.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, great. So, and speaking of interviews, there's an art to interviewing all by itself, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is, having a plan going in and having your questions, but not sticking to that plan if there are other opportunities come up. And I think sometimes you'll hear, usually more beginner hosts, there'll be an interesting point come up in the interview, and you can almost feel like they kind of want to go down that path, but they get pulled back because they've got their next question on their list, and you're kind of left as the audience like, I kind of wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, I think that's something that you just need to do more interviews. It's your first, however many, probably 20, 25. It's going to take you a while to get into that, but realizing that I don't need to stick to the script. I can, if they say something interesting, we're just having a conversation here, and we can go down that rabbit hole there and see where it takes us. And if we don't get to the other questions, who cares? If this was an interesting topic, that's great. And if I'm interested, probably the audience is going to be interested as well.
Right. Absolutely. And if there's something big that you left out, you could always invite them back in 6 months or a year or whenever.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, great. So what's next?
Well, so you've probably got your podcast now recorded. Let's say you've had your guest on and you've done the interview. And so coming up to actual launch, I always recommend getting probably, it depends a bit on what your published schedule is, but I like to have kind of 5 episodes in the bag at least already at that point. Because, it's the same with blogging, same with any kind of content creation. You tell yourself, let's just assume you're doing a weekly published schedule. Yeah, I have time to do one every week, but inevitably something comes up at some point and you start falling behind and you're falling behind. So it's always nice to have that little buffer there to keep you, have some content that you can put out, even if it's not from that week, and just takes the pressure off. And so always I like to, get people to plan a lot more on the front end. And if there's probably a bit of a theme here that the listeners might be realizing, it's that so much of a successful podcast is in the pre-planning. And that probably, you might have the idea and it might take 3 or 4 months to actually get that published. And that's, I would say, average probably. It's not kind of, you come up with the idea, you record your episodes, and within a month you've published. I would say that for successful podcasts, it can take a while. And a lot of that is then the launch strategy and coming up with this. So with the launch, one of the goals, if anybody who has done much research about podcasting probably knows about the iTunes new and noteworthy section. And there's some kind of debate as to how important it is in this day and age. I think it used to be more important to get featured on there, but I always say it doesn't hurt to get featured there, because there you're in a list of, I think it's something like 25 or 50 podcasts in your category, as opposed to the just thousands of podcasts or tens of thousands are in your category that are out there. So it does pay off to get in there, and people do browse. So whatever you can do to get your show featured on some kind of list like that, I would definitely take the time to do it. And so iTunes, their algorithm is a bit of a mystery. Nobody really knows exactly how to crack it, but it seems that most of people's best guesses is that it's a combination of downloads and reviews and ratings and subscriptions, with probably reviews and downloads playing the biggest role. But it is a bit of everything. And so what you want to do is really structure your launch in a way that creates a spike in the graph of the activity around your podcast. And so I usually recommend that people set a soft launch date of, when they release their first episode or 2 episodes. I often encourage people to release 2 episodes off the bat, just so people can kind of get a feel for, maybe if they're somewhat interested in the first episode, but it wasn't quite in their specific interest around the topic, maybe the second one does address that. And, they find that, this person is going to have some stuff that's very targeted towards me. And then in both of those episodes, you're directing people that, hey, we've got a new podcast and, we're wanting to make a splash in iTunes. And it would really help us if on next week's episode, you leave us a rating and review and subscribe and everything. Well, you can subscribe then, but the rating and review, try and all focus that around a specific time, like a specific couple days. And so then on your second week of release, that's kind of your hard launch, where you direct everybody who's had a chance to listen to your show to all, flood iTunes with ratings and reviews. And I think a lot of people struggled. They don't know, well, how do I do this? I don't know that many people. I don't have an audience to start off with. For a lot of people, creating the podcast is their idea of how they're going to get the audience. So the thing I recommend here is you probably know a lot of friends and family still. You have connections outside of your niche, and so you can use those to get featured and moved up the rankings. And the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to hold some kind of a contest where on those first couple episodes you say, hey, we need you to all go, do the rating and review next week, and we're going to be giving away a whatever. And you want to offer something of value, and in order to be entered in the draw, they need to, leave you a review and then email saying, hey, I left a review. I'd like to be entered in the draw. And so I've seen people do a number of different offerings when it comes to these type of contests. I've seen, Amazon gift cards or stuff like that, which is good and can work, but they're quite broad, and it works a lot better if you have something really focused towards your niche. And so that's going to vary quite a bit depending on what your niche is. But think about this. Is again, it goes back to knowing who your audience is, and think about what kind of, is it some kind of software subscription, or is it some kind of gadget that they're probably not going to buy themselves, but that would make their life and their business work so much better, or something like that, and offer something really valuable to them and kind of get people engaged that way. And you can go down, a number of different routes here and get really creative with how you want to structure these contests. And there's software out there that you can set up like viral sharing contests and things like that. And these can all work really well, especially if you don't have a large audience and you want to, find people. And especially if you are doing a viral sharing contest, then I would especially say you do want to have a very targeted prize, because then you're only going to get people who are actually interested in what you're talking about. If you set up a viral contest for $100 Amazon card, you're just going to get everybody out there. Like who doesn't want a $100 Amazon card, or a chance at one, at least, for just leaving a short review of a podcast. So,
but if you're giving away a Yeti microphone, then we'll talk, right?
Exactly. Yep. So that's what I would really say about the launch, is try to create a buzz around it. And this is a lot of times where a lot of that time comes in before the podcast launch. And, the whole launch process can take a month to do. And, if you're reaching out to people and I often like to encourage people to send personal emails rather than mass emails, and reach out to people specifically and say, hey, I'm launching this. Would you be open to leaving me a short review, just checking out the podcast? And another thing I like to recommend is actually in your emails, especially if you're contacting people who are quite busy, take out like a 2-minute or a 5-minute chunk of your podcast and put that in your email and say, hey, I think you might like this section if you just want to get a taste of the podcast and what it's about. And that's enough for them to, get an idea of the podcast and leave a review without having to listen to the whole thing. And so it's really about making it as easy as possible for everybody who you're asking to, help you out with this. So, yeah, that's what I would recommend for launching.
Okay, great. So we've got our first few episodes in the bank, and we've launched. So how do we, going forward, number one, how do you avoid that 7-episode slump that you talked about? And then how do we keep things fresh on our end, and how do we keep people coming back?
Well, so this is, again, I talked about getting lined up beforehand and having a number of episodes. So part of the reason why people start to fade as they get a few episodes in is just the workload of it. I think people don't really quite realize how much work can go into the post-production. I think for a half-hour podcast, I would say when you're looking at the editing and the show notes and getting everything posted online, probably including the recording, it ends up taking maybe 4 to 5 hours for the average podcast in production. So that is definitely a time commitment. So if you think about that's half a day of your week that you are adding something new to, and a lot of us don't have a free half a day. So definitely think about that beforehand, and you definitely batching episodes up is really helpful in that regard and can help you avoid that aspect of the slump. And then also, I think the other thing that causes people to stop with the podcast is just the lack of an audience. And so a successful launch can definitely help you get established off the bat, which, feels great and encourages us to keep going. But I think also a lot of it is tempering our expectations. As I mentioned before, it can take 6 months or a year, and you shouldn't necessarily just assume that you're going to get a whole bunch of people listening to the show right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of building an audience is, as I talked before about, and you might notice here, knowing your audience. And if you know your audience beforehand, you already know that there are people out there who are going to, be in love with your content. And if you talk to these people beforehand, you can kind of sign them up to be evangelists for the podcast once it launches. And they're already going to be excited because you've talked to them about what they want to know. So they know that the podcast is going to be addressing everything that they need from you. And so they're going to tell other people about it, and you can get them to, help offer them some kind of bonuses or inside information or whatever to help promote the podcast on their part. And then, people, you can run Facebook ads and stuff like that, which some people have quite a bit of success with and some people struggle with. And I'm no Facebook ads expert, but obviously it comes down to targeting. And I think the niche can play a big role in how easily and how cheaply you can get listeners through Facebook ads. I know one of my clients, I think she says she spends like $5 per episode and gets something like 200 extra listeners, which is pretty amazing. And other people just struggle and, spend, $50 promoting a podcast and then barely get any new listeners. So I think on the market you're in will definitely have an impact on that aspect of how successfully you can promote the podcast through those means. But outside of that, like I definitely recommend writing in-depth blogs or having transcriptions. That really helps your SEO. I think a lot of people don't really think about the website as a key aspect of a podcast. They think, well, it's on iTunes, so that's kind of the hub, and sure, I'll put my email out there so they can email me and get in touch with me. Maybe I'll have a very basic website, but I really recommend doing it properly and getting blogs and transcripts to go along with the episodes. And when you think about it, that's a lot of keyword density there in if you're translating in a half hour or an hour long podcast, or not translating, but transcribing and having that up on your website. And that just, it can do so much for you. People finding your podcast through just looking up topics that you're instructing on the internet. So you really want to have as many kind of facets of exposure as possible. And podcasting is a great one, but so is, Google search. And so, it's really, after you've started putting out episodes, you need to think that still, you want to have listeners, but your goal, especially if you want to make a business out of this, is still going to be centered around your website. And you need to have some reason to drive people to that. So a lot of that is, if you're blogging, you might be familiar with content upgrades and lead magnets. And so having these things in place on your podcast is really crucial. And somebody who I think does just a great job of this, she does a great job of pretty much everything she does, but is Amy Porterfield.
Oh, yeah.
And every single episode, she's going to have some reason for you to go to her website and give her your email address to sign up for like the episode cheat sheet kind of deal. And they're, I've signed up once, but gotten a bunch of these, and like they are really valuable. And she usually says during the podcast, like, hey, I've got this all written out for you, so you don't need to take notes, because most of us can't take notes anyways when we're listening to the podcast. We're in the car or we're out running or whatever. And so that's just so helpful that you can pay attention for the podcast and not, be straining to try and remember certain things. You can just take it in and know that, oh yeah, I can go back to this and everything is going to be really nicely designed and laid out there, all the good information I need. And she gets your email address out of it, which is something that is vital for us as podcasters to think about. And I think a lot of people starting out don't really realize the value of the email list.
Yeah, that raises another question, the call to action. I mean, when you've held people's attention for 20, 30, 40 minutes, and you can't just let them go.
No.
That's almost a wasted opportunity. So how do you advise people on their call to action and the next steps?
Well, that's really comes down to how your specific podcast. I think it's a bit harder to give broad advice on that topic, but I definitely do recommend that you should have some type of call to action every single episode. And so if we're looking at Amy Porterfield, she's got, come check out whatever it is on my website that I have. A lot of people have kind of a freebie like that, even if it's just asking a question and asking people to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
And that is, just include something at the end. And I know a lot of people will include the asking for ratings and reviews, which is good. A lot of people don't get much engagement on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I often like to not ask for that every episode, but make it stand out, maybe once a month or something,
mm-hmm.
and make it something unique about that pitch, like something that people will remember and they'll stick in their mind. And,
mm-hmm.
oh yeah, this was a bit different. Maybe you're offering something for leaving a rating and review, and then they email you and they'll get some kind of freebie that way or something like that. So
mm-hmm.
that's a great way to get more reviews. And, so really just, asking something of your audience, whether
mm-hmm.
you're offering something to them in response or you're just asking for them to get in touch about what they thought about the episode or potential guests that you should have on, or, it's really as much as you can find out about your audience
mm-hmm.
after you started, before you started, and after you've started. That's really going to dictate the success going forward because, tastes change and people are wondering different things, and you want to keep up to date with what they're wanting from you,
mm-hmm.
and don't just think that, oh, well, I know what they want from me already from 6 months ago when you started, and that's not going to change, because
right.
it will, and people will migrate to someone else who is offering more relevant content.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Well, Jeremy, you have shared a wealth of great information with us today, and so if our listeners are wanting to know more and to learn more from you, I understand that you have a couple of offers for people who would like to learn more about this.
Yeah, so I have actually just finished and put out a short guide called The 7 Mistakes That Are Killing Your Podcast and How to Fix Them. And that is free for everybody. They can go to mistakes.asceticproductions.com. That's ASCETIC productions.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my main website there, asceticproductions.com. There's a blog, and you can find out more about me and what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I also have just released a gear guide that I think I mentioned before,
mm-hmm.
and that's called the Cut the Bullshit Podcast Gear Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really aimed at, it's got options for every budget. So there are some more expensive options if that's
mm-hmm.
to your taste, but it's really, I'm trying to get across here that you don't need to spend much money.
Yeah.
And it's everything need to know about the podcast, tech, gear, software, accessories, all that kind of stuff. And with as little jargon as possible, and I tried to add in as much humor as possible as well. So the response so far has been really good, and it seems like a lot of people have just really appreciated being able to understand a book about technology that doesn't make them feel stupid.
Right.
And that's what I was going for. So it sounds like it's being well received, and you can find that at gear.asceticproductions.com. And lastly, I do have a free Facebook community. It's a closed group and pretty small right now and intimate. And it's really a great place to ask questions about podcasting, really about any aspect of it, whether that's how to monetize or how to get started, what kind of gear you should use, about promotion, anything like that. And you can find that at Cut the Bullshit Podcasting on Facebook, or if you go to cutthebullshitpodcasting.com, that will redirect you there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Well, Jeremy, thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to having you back sometime.
Yeah, this was great. I look forward to coming back on as well.
All right, me too. Thanks.
Many thanks again to Jeremy for joining us today to chat about how to get started in podcasting. Now, let me share with you some of the links that we just talked about. And I also have a special offer from Jeremy. And I'm also going to share these in the blog post for this episode. So if you're driving or at the gym or outside, don't worry about it. Just go to the episode at resonancecontent.com/podcast, and you will have all the links laid out for you right there. So to learn more about Jeremy and his work at Ascetic Productions, visit asceticproductions.com, and that is ASCETIC productions.com. To download his free guide, 7 Mistakes That Are Killing Your Podcast, go to mistakes.asceticproductions.com. And to get a copy of his podcasting gear guide, go to gear.asceticproductions.com. And Jeremy has offered a special discount just for you. If you enter the discount code RESONANCE, all lowercase, you'll get a $10 discount off the podcasting gear guide. So wonderful, very generous discount from Jeremy just for listeners of this podcast, because you are all so very, very awesome. Again, I will share all those links and the discount code in the blog post for this episode at resonancecontent.com/podcast. If you have any questions or want to add to the conversation, feel free to tweet me at @RachParker. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. This came up in our conversation with Jeremy, but it definitely bears repeating. If you are thinking about starting a podcast, I cannot stress enough the importance of starting with your content. As I mentioned, I hear from people all the time that say, I want to start a podcast. What kind of gear do I need? What kind of, how do I register with iTunes? And they want to get into all the technical details. And then I back them up and say, okay, what do you want to say? And who are you saying it to? So before you even think about format or equipment or how you're going to do the post-production, spend the time and effort determining what your content is going to be. And as with all content projects, it's got to start with your audience. Whose ears do you want on the other end of that podcast? And once you have a clear picture of that person, figure out what the mission of your podcast is going to be. What do you want this very specific person to walk away with after they listened to your show? That will give you a solid foundation for your content. And remember, it's the content that will attract people to your podcast, and it's the content that will keep them coming back for more. Okay, campers, that's it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Google Play Music or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. Also, if you want to learn more about content marketing, you will definitely want to grab a copy of my book, The Content Marketing Coach, Everything You Need to Get in the Game and Win. That is available in book and Kindle format. To learn more about the book and to download a free chapter, visit contentmarketingcoachbook.com. As you know, I always like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from Mark Cuban, also known as the shark on Shark Tank and owner of the Dallas Mavericks, just north of here. He once said, quote, "If you're looking for the next big thing and you're looking where everyone else is, you're looking in the wrong place," unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.